Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, I think we're in week 5. Week 5 of this, the Song of the Lark. Stephanie Dudek asked an interesting question over the week, and she asked if the characters who are Taya's friends, Dr. Archie and Ray and the Kohlers and Spanish Johnny, if those people were patterned after individuals who were equally supportive to Cather. And while some of the pioneer characters who were in the hometown where she grew up, some of the details of those characters do appear in the descriptions of the like Spanish Johnny's wife and the Kohlers. They don't seem to be patterned individually on specific individuals. When Taya was a teenager, she apprenticed herself to the local doctor. So that's probably where the doctor character came in. But if you'll notice as you're reading about these people, they each make kind of contribution to the development of Taya as an artist. That is really what those characters do. They are additional examples of artistic people, and she gravitates to them because they are artistic, and she knows that she is different from everybody else. Later on, we'll see that her family considers her to be different, especially when she returns from Chicago. But I do have a little bit of information. This came from the Penguin Random House's Reader's Guide, and it's just gives us a little bit of insight into this development of her character as an artist. The Song of the Lark is the story of an artist's growth and development from childhood to maturity. More particularly, and decidedly more rarely, it traces the development of a female artist, supported by a series of male characters willing to serve her career. Inspired by Willa Cather's own development as a novelist and by the career of an opera diva, that was Fremsted. The Song of the Lark examines the themes of the artist's relationship with family and society, themes that would dominate all of Cather's best fiction. 2 or 3 childhood friends who have faith in her, now we've switched to Taya, suffice to fix her determination. From the time in her early girlhood, when her ambition takes form, to her triumph later, I'm not going to read everything there because it gives it away. Her whole life is molded by her supreme desire for artistic perfection. She does have obstacles to overcome. She has the help of a few sympathetic friends, but she also has oppressive discouragements. Her own crudeness and ignorance, criticism and lack of understanding on the part of her family, poverty, and perhaps worst of all, the cheap success around her, the eclat of superficial art, voices without brains or artistic feeling behind them. That is going to become apparent in today's lecture, if I get that far, that the cheap successes around her, and they very much annoy her. These are voices without brains or artistic feeling at all. Though through it all she clings to her ideal, and in the end has the satisfaction of winning not only the recognition of the larger public, but also the unstinted praise of the few who really know and understand her and her ideal. So, just some insight there. I also, here we are. I have a book here with some additional insights. It's by someone named Hermione Lee. I had to look that up. I wasn't exactly sure how to pronounce that, but it is Hermione Lee. And she says about this artistic element, The peace picture of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, which the young Thea admires in the moonstone home of her friends the Kohlers. Remember that was that wooden creation of the Mr. Kohler. The musical German tailor and his wife is an image for the way Cather pieces her own childhood together with Fremsted's. Isn't that interesting? Thea's parents, for instance, the fine, plain, calm, disciplined mother, and the unsympathetic Norwegian Methodist minister, happy to make money out of his daughter's piano lessons, are more Fremsted's than Cather's. Thea's painful progress from Moonstone to Chicago and her drudgery as an accompanist is the story of the singer's early years. But all the feelings are Cather's. Thea has Willa's childhood double life, divided between her attic room, a secret space for reading and thinking, and the annihilating, boisterous tyranny of family life. She feels Cather's fierce adolescent hostility to the pious Philistinism of her natural enemies, and that's in quote because we're going to see her say that, her natural enemies in the small town. Thea's humiliation at the Sunday school Christmas concert when her difficult piano solo bores the audience, and her talents are eclipsed by the popular charms of Lily Fisher, the Baptist's blonde angel child singing Rock of Ages, is done with the personal ferocity of a long-held grudge. And so the feeling comes from Cather. She would rather be hated than be stupid any day. It's in the text. The pages don't match, but it's around page 80. And Cather draws strongly on her own memories for Thea's friendships with all the people in the town who have something more to offer her than common Moonstone values, like the Kohlers with their garden, where Mrs. Kohler had tried to reproduce a bit of her own village in the Rhine Valley, or the Mexican Spanish Johnny with his bouts of uncontrollable wanderlust. Thea also has Cather's passionate attachment to the landscape of the West. Red Cloud, as Moonstone, is cunningly transported from Nebraska to Colorado so that Thea can be put in a brilliant, dramatic desert setting compared to the yellow prickly pear blossoms that open there in the desert. She is a prickly pear, and she gets more and more prickly pearish. The southwestern setting, derived from her recent travels, where she visited her brother, allows into Thea's story heroic figures of the railroad, exotic Mexican scenes, and above all, a spectacular, glorious rush of desert colors, lovingly and repeatedly described. So she's weaving, like that peace picture, elements of things that she wants to include, like the exotic Mexicans. But though Cather gives her heroine a more dramatic childhood landscape than her own, they have the same feeling for the pioneering West. In a stirring early scene, Thea and Mrs. Kronberg are taken by Thea's devoted railroad man, Ray Kennedy, to the Turquoise Hills, sand dunes 10 miles out of town. Remember that article about space and place. So they leave place and go to space. Where he tells them tales of adventure of the Grand Canyon, the Death Valley, and Thea thinks of an earlier trip with her father to Laramie, Wyoming. So I thought that the analogy of piecing things that she knows, things that Cather knows, into Thea's development is more the way she is tracing her development as an artist, rather than the characters be so autobiographical that they are not autobiographical. Well, yeah, they would be autobiographical from Cather's life. It's not that. It's that she wanted to weave these things together into Thea's artistic growth. So if we go to the text, chapter this is 19. I think it's 19. Yeah, it's 19. This is on page 129. This is the wreck, the train wreck. And I think I read this last week to you, that the trains all go on a single track, so that the cargo trains, like the conductor Ray, would be called when the track is free of passengers. So sometimes that's not always accurate. So they're using the same track, and that's exactly what happens to Ray here. It is well on page 129 for its peace of mind that the traveling public takes railroads so much for granted. A railroad man never forgets that the next run may be his turn. As if sometimes, they do wreck. And here it is. On a single-track road like that upon which Ray Kennedy worked, the freight trains make their way as best they can between passenger trains. Along the one track, dozens of fast and slow trains dash in both directions. That's pretty horrifying, really. End of the next paragraph. A freight train on a single-track road gets anywhere at all only by stealing bases. Isn't that an interesting analogy? 2 paragraphs later, the wreck that caught Ray was a very commonplace one, nothing thrilling about it, and it got only 6 lines in the Denver papers. And at the top of the next page, no, I don't know what I was talking about there. About 2/3 of the way down. 14 was wrecked at Saxony this morning, he shouted, and Kennedy's all broke up. We're sending an engine down with the doctor, and the operator at Saxony says Kennedy wants you to come along with us and bring your girl. So, poor Taya is going to go to this wreck. If you look on the next page, 132, get your hat, my girl. Kennedy's hurt down the road, and he wants you to run down with me. Suggesting, of course, the closeness of their relationship. We know that Kennedy secretly has his eye on her. He wants to marry her, but we've also known that he has been the utmost reserved with her. If you look at the top of page 133, she was frightened and absent-minded. She felt that she ought to be thinking about Ray, but her mind kept racing off to all sorts of trivial and irrelevant things. She wondered whether Grace Johnson would be furious when she came to take her music lesson and found nobody there. Likely a defense mechanism. I'm sure that's what Cather meant for us to see, that Taya is quite young, and so her brain is going all over except on Ray Johnson, probably out of fear. Her mind worked fast, but she could fix it upon nothing. And then at the bottom of 133, however little there was left of him, that little was certainly Ray Kennedy. His personality was as positive as ever, and the blood and dirt on his face seemed merely accidental. At the top of page 134, Mr. Kronberg stood by, nervously rubbing his hands together and trying to think of something to say. Serious situations always embarrassed him and made him formal. We've seen him acting like that before. He doesn't seem to engage in his parishioners. He uses a stilted kind of language when he's being ministery. Down right in the middle of the page, I thought this was really funny. Not really funny, but sort of funny. Taya coming up over the doctor's shoulder, he saw Taya coming up the gulch in her pink chambray dress, carrying her sun hat by the strings. Such a yellow head. He often told himself that he was perfectly foolish about her hair. And later on, when she goes to goes to the Mexican town, the Mexicans, of course, all have black hair, and so they can't take their eyes off of her hair either. Down at the bottom of page 134, Ray says, I'm the same old goods, only a little dented. I think that's a plain-spoken way of calming her fears, I think. If you look on 135, about 2/3 of the way down, it was the first time she had ever been conscious of that power to bestow intense happiness by simply being near someone. So that's a little crumb of her heart that she has gained from Ray. She always remembered this day as the beginning of that knowledge. And this is a whole process. The whole book is a process of her gaining knowledge into what it feels like to be an artist. At the bottom of page 135, the very last line, it had always been like that. The things he admired had always been a way out of his reach. A college education, a gentleman's manner, an Englishman's accent, things over his head. And Teo was further out of his reach than all the rest put together. He had been a fool to imagine it, but he was glad he had been a fool. She had given him one grand dream, to marry her. Every mile of his run from Moonstone to Denver was painted with the colors of that hope. And then a line later, he knew the truth. Teo was never meant for a rough fellow like him. Hadn't he really known all along? Maybe he did, but we all know this. If you have a dream, you have hope. Last lines of this paragraph. Yes, she was bound for the big terminals of the world. No way stations for her. His lids drooped. In the dark, he could see her as she would be after a while, in a box at the Tabor Grand in Denver, with diamonds on her neck and a tiara in her yellow hair, with all the people looking at her through their opera glasses, and a United States senator maybe talking to her. As I've been saying, Cather drops hints all along, and here is a bit of foreshadowing, but he's dying, and because he's dying, he can speak the truth. Remember, the truth speaker. Next paragraph. The spark in his eye, which is one's very self, caught the spark in hers that was herself, and for a moment they looked into each other's natures. That spark, she calls it an it, and she says it lives either in her head, or sometimes she says that it lives in her cheek. Down at the bottom of this page, he had backed a winner once in his life, so he's taking that to his grave. Page 137. You know, don't you, Tay, that I think you are just the finest thing I've ever struck in this world. The tears ran down Taya's cheeks. I cried. You don't, let's see. You're too good for me, Ray. You're a lot too good for me. And then they go back, Taya and Mr. Kronberg, and we find that he has indeed gone on. But the fictionally, Ray has to be in a wreck because he has to be able to let her go. Otherwise, she runs the risk of not taking the chance to go beyond Moonstone. So he has to be got out of the way. But he's also the mechanism by which she can go to Chicago. His life, on 138, but his life was insured for $600 in Tay's favor. He leaves her money so that she can go to Chicago. She's not making a whole lot as a piano teacher in Moonstone. And we did see that she enjoyed being the piano teacher in Moonstone because she had at least enough money to buy things for her family. Down at the bottom of 138, it seems that for some time, Taya has wanted to go away and study music. This is Mr. Kronberg. It was Kennedy's wish that she should take this money and go to Chicago this winter. I really like the references to Chicago. I'm sure most of you have been to Chicago 4,000 times. So I like the references to Michigan Avenue. This is in many chapters. She walks down Michigan Avenue on the lakeside. Well, there's not much. You can see the lakeside, but I think at this time there certainly wasn't the development that there is now on Michigan Avenue. So they're going to send her to Chicago. At the top of 139, it's not a natural life for a young girl. She'll either get warped or wither up before her time. And that's true. Down right in the middle of the page. Perhaps I don't doubt it. You are very kind, Dr. Archie. Mr. Kronberg was ornamenting his desk blotter with hieroglyphics. Isn't that interesting? He's doodling. I don't doodle when I lecture, but I'm sure you may doodle as you're listening to me. And the next page, it's just a really perfect little detail. At the top of page 140, well, doctor, you had better talk it over with Mrs. Kronberg. I make it a point to defer to her wishes in such matters. That certainly is true. We'll see that developing as in their relationship. She understands all her children perfectly. I may say that she has all the mother's insight and more. Again, Cather has been dropping hints about the astute observations that Mrs. Kronberg has made about her children. She was to set off with Dr. Archie on the 15th of October, and she gave lessons until the 1st of September. But we know, and we're going to see this retrospectively, that the piano lessons that she was giving were to her oppressive. And she began to dislike her students because she says that they all have stupid faces. I guess if you're very, very talented, you can say that other people have stupid faces. Towards the bottom, Tilly, who always helped Mrs. Kronberg with the family sewing, was for letting Miss Spencer challenge Chicago on Taya's person. She's going to dress her up like my mother always said, like Aunt Esther's pet horse, with a big hat and flowers, and it would not have been suitable. We see another reference to the concern this family has, being a minister's family, about people talking. At the top of 141, some people approved of Taya's going to Chicago, but most people did not. This is a little town. Towards the bottom of page 141, well, it's in the middle, at the beginning of that big paragraph, Charlie had taken Taya's trunk and telescope to the depot in his delivery wagon early that morning. I did not know what they were talking about, what she was talking about in this as a telescope, and I've got some notes here on it. What chapter am I in? Oh, I'm in 19. I can't find my note, but a telescope. Oh, here it is. It's a bag that's collapsible luggage. I'm thinking it has maybe a similar function to a duffel bag. I have these duffel bags made by Eddie Bauer, and they zip on the end so you can make it shorter if you don't need all the space, and you can unzip it on the end and make it bigger in case you are coming home with a bunch of souvenirs. I think that's something similar. Down at the bottom of 141, she felt the more at ease about letting Taya go away from home because she had good sense about her clothes and never tried to dress up too much. Another reference to her clothing, because Taya is inclined so far to be conservative in her dress. At the top of page 142, Tor was uncommunicative that morning and would only talk about how he would rather get a sandburr in his toe every day than wear shoes and stockings. My son used to talk about not liking turtlenecks because he said it felt like he had a cricket in his shirt. I did not understand what he was talking about, but turns out he didn't like the tag. And surely he must have gotten a cricket in his shirt one time, and that's what it felt like to him. So he would never wear turtlenecks. I'm sure it's the same kind of reference. Over on 143, the end of that first incomplete paragraph, suddenly Mr. Kronberg suddenly felt his eloquence fail, and then at the end, but this morning he was thinking about that hard-headedness was a reassuring quality in a daughter who was going to Chicago alone. Yeah, I can just imagine. I sent one of my kids off to culinary school in Chicago, and it was a close your eyes and jump in kind of thing. And she was in her 20s. He remembered at the end of the last paragraph, at the end of this paragraph, he remembered it was as a place full of cheap shows and dance halls and boys from the country who were behaving disgustingly. I'm sure that's what Chicago was like at the time. Over on page 144, at the end of the first paragraph, she had always been a sweet-smelling child. Her mother had always liked to kiss her when she happened to think of it. Mrs. Kronberg isn't very demonstrative. And again, this character must have been patterned after some of the immigrants in Cather's hometown. Cather used to go around on horseback and visit some of these friends that she made, but they were adults, like the characters who are her friends in this context. And Mrs. says she won't come back a little girl. And then she's at the bottom of this page. She's in the train. Taya was surprised that she did not feel a deeper sense of loss at leaving her old life behind her. She's leaving the place. It seemed, on the contrary, as she looked out at the yellow desert speeding by, that she had left very little. And now she's seeing the desert whisk by, and she is moving into space, and then will come out of space again into place. Everything that was, everything that was essential seemed to be right there in the car with her. She lacked nothing. She even felt more compact and confident than usual. She was all there, and something else was there too. In her heart, was it, or under her cheek? And she doesn't know where the it is, but it becomes greater and greater, and she feels it more and more as she matures. Anyhow, it was all about her somewhere, that warm sureness, that sturdy little companion with whom she shared a secret. And remember, her piano teacher and she looked in a drawer, it was a hypothetical drawer, and saw it, the artistry. At the end of this paragraph, she's sitting with Dr. Archie. She's not going off to Chicago unescorted. He knew that the splendid things of life were few, after all, and so very easy to miss. Dr. Archie is all for sending her off because he knows about her heart as well. So she's going off to Chicago. I think I read that to you last week. So we go into the next chapter, entitled The Song of the Lark. And, of course, perhaps that's Taya. It's what we saw in that painting. And so she is riding along on 149. Taya and Dr. Archie had gone from Moonstone 4 days. On the afternoon of the 19th of October, they were in a streetcar riding through the depressing, unkept waters of North Chicago. And he deposits her at the Young Women's Christian Association and was miserable and homesick there. Well, you know what that is. That's the YMCA. Kind of horrified that that's where she is. Things had not gone very well so far, and she had a disillusioning morning. Remember, we already know that she's bound for disappointments. The boarding houses, his inspection, he deposits her there and then goes off to look at boarding houses. His inspection of boarding houses was not encouraging. Turn to page 150 at the bottom, near the bottom of the second complete paragraph. He looked about 35. Oh, who is he talking to? Oh, this is Mr. Larson. He looked about 35, but he was growing bald, and his thin hair was parted above his left ear. And now I know I underlined that. Brought up over the bare spot on the top of his head. That's hilarious. We all probably know people who cover up the balding spot on the top of their hair with a giant comb over. Recent presidents included. He looked cheerful and agreeable. He wore a blue coat and no cuffs. This is Andor Harsani, the teacher. Now, I tried to see if this was a real teacher because many of the characters who play a role in Taya's life are real characters from the opera, but this Andor Harsani is not. At the top of page 151, no, I don't need that. The middle of this big paragraph, she was sitting on the lounge, her knees far apart. Isn't that a funny picture? Her gloved hands lying stiffly in her lap like a country girl. Well, She's sitting with her legs wide, but she's got a big dress on. So, but she looks like a country girl. And then there's a line here that I liked. It was always windy in that part of Chicago. It's always windy in Chicago. The wind goes zipping down those streets. Turn the page to 152. Dr. Archie chuckled. All preachers are alike, officious and on their dignity, like to deal with women and girls, but not with men. He took up the thin volume from the minister's desk. To his amusement, it proved to be a book of devotional and kindred poems by Mrs. Ariella Larson. I think that person is fictional as well. Then down at the end of this paragraph, both ladies seem to have chosen the same subjects too. They're all Old Testament stories of family, tragedy, betrayal, and strife. Of course, people's books reveal a lot about them. Let's see. The Reverend Mr. Lars Larson was a reactionary Swede, which is how how Dr. Archie got in touch with him. If you look over on page 153, towards the middle of this incomplete paragraph, he was the only one of the family who went through the high school, and by the time he graduated, this is Mr. Larson, he had already made up his mind to study for the ministry because it seemed to him the least laborious of all callings. Insofar as he could see, it was the only business in which there was practically no competition, in which a man was not all the time pitted against other men who were willing to work themselves to death. So this Mr. Larson is going to figure to a degree in Taya's progress, because he is going to hire her on so that she can play music or even sing at funerals. She doesn't make much, but it prevents her from completely spending all of the money right up front. At the end of this towards the bottom of this page, he invested his money carefully and was that rare thing, a preacher of independent means. His white, well-kept hands were his result. The evidence that he had worked out his life successfully in the way that pleased him. His Kansas brothers hated the sight of his hands. But they're no labor. There isn't any calluses on them. Of course, the Kansas brothers are working their brains out. Larson liked all the softer things in life, but he ate a great deal of candy. He ate a great deal of candy for his throat. I wrote LOL in the margin. I hope eating candy doesn't make you soft, because I have a whole drawer of it. So I like it. Next page on the top of 154. When he drilled his choir, I liked these details. That's why I underlined this. He always held his hand with the little and index fingers curved higher than the other two. Little and index fingers higher, like this. Like a noted German conductor he had heard. On the whole, the Reverend Larson was not an insincere man. He merely spent his life resting and playing to make up for the time his forebears had wasted grubbing in the earth. He was a simple-hearted and kind. He enjoyed his candy and his children and his sacred cantatas. He could work energetically at almost any form of play. So that gives us his role. But he is going to be part of her fabric. Over on let's see, Mrs. Anderson is musical too and sings in the Mozart Society. Let's see. Very well, there's no time like the present. Let's go and see Mrs. Lorch and Mrs. Anderson, as a mother and daughter with whom she might board. The minister put his violin in its case and caught up a black and white check traveling cap that he wore when he was riding his high Columbia wheel. You know what that is? That's those bicycles with a giant front wheel. It's a big front wheel bike. Remember, in the Women Who Did, the bike became a means for women to extricate themselves from their homes. They could go out places because they couldn't go on the trains, so they went on bikes. So here's her room in Chicago on page 156. Mrs. Lorch and her daughter lived, oh, I just like these details, half a mile from the Swedish Reformed Church in an old square frame house with a porch supported by frail pillars set in a damp yard full of big lilac bushes. The house, which had been left over from country times, needed paint badly and looked gloomy and despondent among its smart Queen Anne neighbors. There was a big backyard with 2 rows of apple trees and a grape arbor and a warped walk 2 planks wide. So, what does it say? Which led to the coal bins at the back of the lot. I just liked the detail. I would imagine that there are houses like this in some parts of Chicago still. At the top of page, more detail. At the top of page 157, the wallpaper was brownish yellow with blue flowers. When it was put up, the carpet certainly had not been consulted. It doesn't match. Down at the bottom, let's see. Let's see, who is this? This is Mold Mrs. Lorch, who's fat and jolly, with bright little eyes and hair of several colors. Her own hair was one cast of iron gray. Her switch, another, I didn't know what that was. It's a pigtail. So, I have a woman in my jail class who is Hispanic, and she's been incarcerated for a while. So there's a lot of streaks of gray along here, but the pigtail is black. That's what that made me think of. Her clothes always smelled of savory cooking, except when she was dressed for a church or a coffee klatch. I've heard that word before. I don't know where, but I knew what that is. It's a coffee party. Next page. Let's see, there's some nice detail here about Mrs. A's husband. Oscar Anderson, who was a strong, full-blooded fellow who had counted on a long life and had been rather careless about his business affairs. He was killed by the explosion of a steam boiler in the mills, and his brothers managed to prove that he had very little stock in the big business. In other words, the finances of the 2 ladies are somewhat small. At the top of page 159, Mrs. Anderson was certainly a depressing person. It sometimes annoyed Taya very much to hear her insinuating knock on the door, her flurried explanation of why she had come as she backed towards the stairs. This is just more description about her. She was a temporary soprano at the church. When she was working and heard Mrs. Anderson tiptoeing past her door, she used to shrug her shoulders and wonder whether she was always to have a Tilly diving furtively about her in some disguise or another. She did remind me of Tilly, even before Cather told us that. On the next page, 160, there's a reference to a Sangerfest. I had to look that up. That is a singing festival. And then the last sentence of this paragraph, Taya shut her teeth and repeated to herself words she had learned from Joe Giddy and Spanish Johnny. You got to wonder if those are swear words. I think they are. In these 2 good women, Taya found faithful friends, and in their house she found the quiet and peace which helped her to support the great experiences of that winter. So in the next chapter, it opens with Ander Harsani had never liked a pupil in the least like Taya Kronberg. He had never had one more intelligent, and he had never had one so ignorant. So that's the way she gets to Chicago. At the top of page 161, at the end of that incomplete paragraph, Taya studied some of the Kindersätzen with him, as well as some little sonatas by Mozart and Clementi. But for the most part, Wunsch stuck to Czerny and Hummel. And here we go. Okay. Yeah, these are all, are we in chapter 3? Yeah. These are references to romantic music. Of the musicians mentioned in this paragraph, Beethoven, Schumann, His wife, Clara, the pianist, were part of the Romantic movement, which was modern and daring in Wunsch's youth. The others are from the earlier classical generation. So, again, we get just a little bit of information about Wunsch and how he seems to have been educated as a youth. But that seems to have stopped, and he's tended to wander. In the next paragraph, he wondered how she had been able to work so hard when she knew so little of what she was working toward. She had been taught according to the old Stuttgart method: stiff back, stiff elbows, a very formal position of the hands. Stuttgart is a method at the Stuttgart Conservatory in which beginning piano players use a pole attached to the piano so that wrists and arms could rest on it to develop finger muscles independently. It fell out of favor because it caused rigidity in the wrist and arm. Maybe carpal tunnel syndrome. That's what I would think. The best thing about her preparation was that she had developed an unusual power of work. Another little crumb from Cather. Towards the bottom of this page, instinctively, one went to the rescue of a creature who had so much to overcome and who struggled so hard. She works. She's a kind of a phenomenal child, and she's a teenager now. Top of the next page, 162. She always remembered it as the happiest and the wildest and saddest of her life. This is this winter in Chicago. There were times when she came home from her lesson and lay upon her bed, hating Wunsch and her family, hating a world that had let her grow up so ignorant. Next, towards the bottom of this paragraph, every artist makes himself born. Isn't that interesting? It is very much harder than the other time and longer. Your mother did not bring anything into the world to play piano. That you must bring into the world yourself. That is a solid piece of advice that she will take. A good deal of the time, Cather tells us that she was comfortless. Down at the bottom, though, is an interesting paragraph. Late one afternoon, when she was thoroughly tired and wanted to struggle on into the dusk, Harsanyi, tired too, threw up his hands and laughed at her. "Not today, Miss Kronberg. That sonata will keep. It won't run away, even if you and I should not waken up tomorrow. It will be there." And we're beginning to see her evolve. Next page, just at the big paragraph at the top, there were hours too of great exaltation when she was at her best and became a part of what she was doing and ceased to exist in any other sense. That's one of those notes to yourself that should be starred, because we are beginning to see her find that she thinks lives here or in her heart. At the bottom of this paragraph, she had never learned to work away from the piano until she came to Harsanyi, and it helped her more than anything had ever helped her before. At the top of page 164, Harsanyi knew that his interesting pupil, the savage blonde, one of his male students called her, was sometimes very unhappy. She saw in her discontent a curious definition of character. He would have said that a girl with so much musical feeling, so intelligent, with good training of eye and hand, would, when thus suddenly introduced to the great literature of the piano, have found boundless happiness. But he soon learned that she was not able to forget her own poverty in the richness of the world he opened to her. The artist is developing. So this paragraph is another interesting one. Often when he played to her, her face was the picture of restless misery because she can't grasp it. She can't be a part of it. She would sit crouching forward, her elbows on her knees, her brows drawn together, and her gray-green eyes, smaller than ever, reduced to mere pinpoints of cold, piercing light. Sometimes, while she listened, remember when Ray was dying, they connected with that piercing light in each of their eyes. Sometimes when she listened, she would swallow hard 2 or 3 times, look nervously from left to right, drawing her shoulders together, exactly, he thought, as if she were being watched, or as if she were naked and heard someone coming. So she's trying to bore herself into the music. B-O-R-E, not being bored. Harsani did not know at the top of the next page that she was singing in a choir and had often to sing at funerals. Neither did he realize how much her work with him stirred her and exhausted her. Let's see. She goes to see Emma Duke, Australian-American singer who organized her own opera touring company in 1889. So she gets tickets and goes, and she sits in. Let's see, is this where? She had bought this. She's going to this theater, and Taya had bought this cape at a big department store. I wonder if that was Marshall Field's, and had paid $16.50 for it. So, of course, I looked that up. It was $400. That's the quality of the coat she buys. And she had never paid more than $10 for a coat before, and that seemed to her a large price. Let's see. No, I don't need that. If we look, no musician had ever a better wife. That's Mr. Harsani and his wife. Unfortunately, her beauty was of a very, very frail and impressionable kind, and she was beginning to lose it. Her face was too thin now, and there were often dark circles under her eyes. She's still under 30. This is the Mrs. of Harsani, the piano teacher. To me, they seemed much older than that. At the bottom of page 167, the children always had dinner with their parents and behaved very nicely at the table. These are Harsani's children. At the top of page 168, Mama, Anders said seriously as he climbed into his chair and tucked his napkin into the collar of his blouse. Miss Kronberg's hands are every kind of animal there is. It's because she's making animal pictures. But I think this is emblematic of the kind of animal nature that she has, this natural nature. In the beginning of the paragraph at the bottom of the page, Harsani was then a man of 32. He was to have a very brilliant career, but he did not know it then. Isn't that interesting? As I said, Cather drops these hints to us at the top of the next page. He believed that he's only got one eye, and he believed that the glass eye, which gave one side of his face such a dull, blind look, had ruined his career, or rather had made a career impossible for him. Harsani lost his eye when he was 12 years old in a Pennsylvania mining town where explosives happened to be kept too near the frame shanties in which the company packed newly arrived Hungarian families. Yikes. Again, the immigrant experience, though. At the end of the next paragraph, he understood that the accident was merely one of the things that are bound to happen to the general scramble of American life, where everyone comes to grab and takes his chance. That speaks of the immigrant experience, but it also seems to foreshadow perhaps something that Taya may do. She may grab her chance. So Taya is a temporary soprano at the church because I just marked this in the margin because I thought it was interesting. The regular soprano is not well. Well, we know what that means. She's indisposed. One didn't go out when one was in the family way. Next page on 170, towards the bottom of this page. Harsani asked Taya how she happened to know so much about the way in which freight trains are operated. She tried to give him some idea of how the people in desert towns live by the railway and order their lives by the coming and going of the trains. And I read that article for you on purpose last week because of the trains. They made an enormous change in the Wild West. Down at the bottom of this page, the Harsanis were poor, and it was due to Mrs. Harsani's good management that their lives, even in hard times, moved along with dignity and order. She seems very much like Mrs. Kronberg. Let's see, on the next page, Taya looked at the keyboard uneasily for a moment, and then she began, "Come, ye disconsolate," the hymn Wunsch had always liked to hear her sing. Mrs. Harsani glanced questioningly at her husband, but he was looking intently at the toes of his boots, shading his forehead with his long, white hand. When Taya finished the hymn, she did not turn around, but immediately began the 90 and 9. I have a note on that one, is a hymn by Elizabeth Celia Douglas Clephane, also entitled The Lost Sheep. This is an important moment because Harsani didn't know the degree to which Taya could sing. And down at the bottom of this, we're going to see, and we have already seen, but almost halfway done, that Gluck's Orpheus makes many appearances. Cather really liked that opera, and at the bottom of the page is a line from this. She frowned at the keyboard a moment, played the few introductory measures, and began, "Oh, I have soldiered them." And then over on the next page, let's see. Well, she's just singing for the first time to them. At the bottom of page 171, he loved to hear a big voice throb in a relaxed, natural throat, and he was thinking that no one had ever felt this voice vibrate before. It was like a wild bird that had flown into his studio on Middleton Street from goodness knew how far. No one knew that it had come or even that it had existed, least of all the strange, crude girl in whose throat it beat its passionate wings. That's another starred moment because it's at this point that she's beginning to let this be free. At the top of the next page, I thought this was interesting. Everything about her had indicated it. The big mouth, the wide jaw and chin, the strong white teeth, the deep laugh. The machine was so simple and strong, seemed to be so easily operated. I don't know if any of you, do you all know who Freddie Mercury is? He was the lead singer of Queen. And he used to say he had these horrendous buck teeth. I mean, they really stuck out. And but he used to say that he didn't want to get his teeth fixed because he was afraid it was going to damage the tone of his voice. And I wrote that in the margin because Taya has the kinds of things that will make her instrument work well. She sang from the bottom of herself. Her breath came from down where her laugh came from, a deep laugh, which Mrs. Harsani had once called the laugh of the people. A relaxed throat, a voice that lay on the breath, that had never been forced off the breath. It rose and fell in the air column like the little balls which are put to shine in the jet of a fountain. The voice did not thin as it went up. The upper tones were as full and rich as the lower, produced in the same way and as unconsciously, only with a deeper breath. This is the voice. She's let it out, and pretty soon she's going to start calling something this artistic self. In the next chapter on page, and you should start that because this is where the voice is beginning to be free. Next page, at the top of the page 175, a healthy but powerful organ had found its own method, which was not a bad one. At the end of this paragraph, that was in the beginning. After the first few lessons, his own pleasure and hers were pretext enough. The singing came at the end of the lesson hour, and they both treated it as a form of relaxation. Arsani did not say much to his wife about his discovery. He's had a eureka moment listening to this strange little girl. A teenager, really. Next paragraph. After Miss Kronberg left him, he often lay down in his studio for an hour before dinner with his head full of musical ideas, with an effervescence in his brain which he had sometimes lost for weeks together under the grind of teaching. He had never got so much back for himself from any pupil as he did from Miss Kronberg. So this is becoming a give and take, in much the same way that there was a give and take with her other friends, her Moonstone friends. They didn't treat her like a child. They spoke to her like an adult. She lifted the tedium of the winter for him, gave him curious fancies and reveries. Musically, she was sympathetic to him. Why all this was true, he never asked himself. He had learned that one must take where and when one can the mysterious mental irritant that rouses one's imagination, that it is not to be had by order. It has to be artistic. It's the opposite of order and reason. So he understands this. And at the top of the page 176, under her crudeness and brusque hardness, he felt there was a nature quite different, of which he had never got so much as a hint, except when she was at the piano or when she sang. Because she stirred him more than anything could adequately explain. I think she could adequately explain. Perhaps you saw me jump? That was the UPS alert. So, or Amazon, I'm not even sure what it is. But yes, that's something that I worry about, that kind of barking. I'm surprised the other two didn't get in on it. Anyway, I have a note to myself here to read a section from, this is a book called Critical Essays on Willa Cather. The fourth, fifth, and sixth parts of the Song of the Lark treat the liberation of Taya's treasure of creative power. Isn't that fabulous? Willa Cather does not delineate a rapid ascent to achievement from the desire of childhood and the direction of youth. Between consecration and action, there falls a quiet pause for reflection. In Willa Cather's view of artistic growth, the reposeful lull is a crucial moment. It is particularly restorative for Taya Kronberg. The pause is the retreat before the great advance, a return to the origin of all creativity, the earth. We haven't gotten that far. I don't know why this was in here. Later on, we will see. Oh, that's because I wanted you to see that. This liberation of Taya's creative power. We'll come back to the section later, because the place where she's going to rest and restore herself is in Panther Canyon. That's not for a bit, but in Panther Canyon, it reflects Cather's memory of having made that visit to the area where her brother was. Let's see. Over on the next page, you have to stop again. 1 second. Sorry. I had to make sure that my little French bulldogs didn't escape. They get into all kinds of things if they escape. So anyway, if we look at the top of page 177, there is a quote, Ich weiß nicht. I can't pronounce it. It means, I do not know why this confronts me, that I am so sorrowful. It's And then the next line, a kind of happiness vibrated in her voice. So she's beginning to have this intuitive grasp of her voice and her music. And we can think that perhaps that was the kind of awakening that Cather also must have felt when she began to write and understand. A few lines later, she says, or the narrator says, until she saw it as a whole, she wandered like a blind man surrounded by torments. So she's working on a piece of music, and then suddenly she sees the big picture. I see this sometimes when I'm teaching. I see the light go on. That's why teaching online isn't always satisfying, because I can't see the light go on, and that's what Taya is experiencing. After she once had her revelation, after she got the idea that went to her, not always to him, explained everything, then she went forward rapidly. But she hangs on the music. At the end of this paragraph, then all at once something would happen in her brain, and she would begin to do all that had been for weeks telling her to do without realizing that he ever had told her. So he is guiding her well, and but we can see her artistic nature, and how she has to work at it. My students sometimes, especially the night students, they will write something, and I tell them all the time, it's a process. This is a process. And sure as shooting, they'll have a paper due, and I give them 3 weeks to write a paper. And inevitably, they write it the night before, and once they get down to the bottom paragraph, submit, and it's done. Then the conclusion doesn't match the introduction, and the body paragraphs are kind of disjointed. They're not getting the big picture either. But Taya does. She works at it and works at it. This part in the middle here, and it says, and with this, her poignant singing, the Lorelei has done. It's about the singing process. At the end of this chapter on 178, at the top, I like to see Miss Kronberg get a hold of an idea. In spite of being so talented, she's not quick. But when she does get an idea, it fills her up to the eyes. She had my room so reeking of a song this afternoon that I couldn't stay there. That is powerful. And then the last lines of the chapter, fresh as she is at it all, I occasionally fancied that if she knew how, she would like to diminish. He moved his left hand out into the air as if he were suggesting a diminuendo, a decrease in loudness to an orchestra. I think what he is saying is that she so becomes the music that herself, her person begins to diminish because the music takes over. At the top of page 179, I just made a mark to myself in the margin. Here's example of her being a small town girl. She was nervous about counting her change, and she could not accustom herself to having her purchases sent to her address. She felt much safer with all her bundles under her arm. I'm glad I read that, because that was indeed Amazon. I like to order from Amazon. So in the middle of the paragraph, we see that she is not really experiencing Chicago. She's still on the outskirts of it. And in the middle of the page, at Christmas time, she did feel some curiosity about the toy stores, and she wished she held Tor's little mitten fist in her hand as she stood before the windows. There used to be an enormous toy store, F.A.O. Schwartz, downtown. It was the most magnificent toy store. You probably remember it. It was multiple stories high, and it was right downtown, and I that's what I'm picturing. I don't know if that was actually the store. Then she likes the jeweler's windows too. They had a strong attraction for her. She had always liked bright stones. Remember her collecting rocks? And then at the end of the paragraph, these seemed very well worthwhile to her, things worth coveting. Toys and jewels. At the bottom of page 179, when Taya came to live with them, she had expressed a wish to see two places, Montgomery Ward and Company's and Montgomery Ward and Company's big mail order store, and the packing house to which all the hogs and cattle that went through Moonstone had been bound. Those are the things that she knew of from Moonstone. They must have ordered from Montgomery Ward and Company. And so those were the only two things that were familiar and that she had any interest in. Why the packing house? Can't even imagine. So she goes to the packing house at the top of page 180, and she asked innumerable questions and was impatient because her little escort, because he knew so little of what was going on inside of his own department. But like what she does with the music, she dissects it, asking many, many, many questions. At the end of this paragraph, as for Taya, she had enjoyed the afternoon very much and wrote her father a brief but clear account of what she had seen, dissecting it like she does the music. Down at the bottom of page 180, there's a reference to Koretz, who is a landscape painter. Mrs. Anderson says at the top, such examples of the Barbizon school. This was meaningless to Taya, who did not read the art columns in the Sunday Inter-Ocean as Mrs. Anderson did. The Inter-Ocean is a daily paper. And the Barbizon School, my note says the Barbizon School was an informal group of landscape painters who worked in the village of Barbizon in France, circa 1830 to 70. Though not a member, Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot is often associated with the school, which was strongly influenced by 17th century Dutch landscape painting and was very popular in America. So the Mrs. Anderson doesn't have a particularly forward-thinking grasp of art, but Taya is not participating in any of the things the arts that Chicago can offer. As I said, my daughter went to Chicago to go to culinary school because she wanted to experience the Chicago scene. She said that. She used those words, the Chicago scene. And sometimes I see that, or later we'll see this emerge from Taya. In the middle of the next paragraph, Taya fought her way across the unprotected space in front of the Art Institute and into the doors of the building. Next few lines, she had a serious reckoning with herself. She seldom thought about her way of life, about what she ought and ought not do. Usually there was but one obvious and important thing to be done. But that afternoon she remonstrated with herself severely. She told herself that she was missing a great deal, that she ought to be more willing to take advice, to go see things. She was sorry that she had let months pass without going to the Art Institute. After this, she would go once a week. Another awakening. We're following her growth, and as the article said at the beginning, that I read at the beginning, this was a process of development. This wasn't suddenly when she was 5 a eureka moment, and there she is painting away and singing away. It took a long time to develop. There's a reference in the next paragraph to the casts. On the whole, she spent more time with the casts than with the pictures. And those are 19th century art schools and museums typically exhibited plaster casts of famous classical and Renaissance sculptures for educational purposes. The Dying Gladiator, accurately the Dying Gaul, at the Capitoline Museum in Rome is a marble copy of an original Greek bronze by Epigonus, circa AD 240, to commemorate the victory over the invading Gauls in Asia Minor. Excuse me. Byron describes it in Canto 4, stanza 140-41 of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. The Venus de Milo, you probably can picture that one. I'm sure you can picture that one. Venus de Milo is a Greek marble dating from the 2nd to the 1st century BC, found on the island of Milos and now in the Louvre. The Apollo Belvedere, also celebrated in Childe Harold, named for its location in the Belvedere Gallery at the Vatican, is a Roman marble copy of an original Greek bronze. The great equestrian statue was a Renaissance piece, a bronze portrait of Bartolomeo Colinoli by the Florentine sculptor Verrocchio, designed in 1840 and erected in the piazza of St. Mark's in Venice. Just so you get some references. So she's very much enthralled with these things. The casts, when she lingered among them, always made her gloomy. It was with a lightening of heart, a feeling of throwing off old miseries and old sorrows of the world, that she ran up the staircase to the pictures. She likes, and there are just several other references to real art. Let's see, Pasha's Grief is a French romantic history and genre painter, Jerome, today at the Jocelyn Museum in Omaha, Nebraska. And the newborn calf on a litter, where is that? It's a realist painting of a French peasant life who was sometimes linked with the Barbizon school. The Song of the Lark at the bottom of this page, painted by Jules Breton. In 1901 article about the Chicago Institute, Cather wrote that hundreds of merchants and farmer boys all over Nebraska and Kansas and Iowa remembered this painting, and perhaps the ugly little peasant girl standing barefoot among the wheat fields in the early morning have taught some of these people to hear the lark sing for themselves. Because so many readers confused Thea Kronberg with the Lark of the title, however, Cather removed an illustration of the painting from the book's jacket and included a disclaimer in her 1932 preface. So the Song of the Lark is a reference to the painting, but the painting does not contain Thea. Over on the next page, here's where Harsanyi gives her symphony tickets. The morning shone like a holiday, and for her it was to be a holiday. There was an air, that sudden treacherous softness, which makes the Poles who work in the packing houses get drunk. I suppose that must have been like yesterday. It was an absolutely miraculous day. Now it's gloomy again. At such times, beauty is necessary, and in Packingtown there is no place to get it except at the saloons, where one can buy for a few hours the illusion of comfort, hope, love, whatever one most longs for. So that's what the Poles are looking for. Again, more immigrants. But Harsanyi had given her symphony tickets, and Mrs. Lorch, who understands Chicago weather, which is not much different from ours, sunny in the morning, blizzarding in the afternoon. So she goes to the auditorium. Ever been here? This place is just miraculous. The top is what it looks like on the outside. And as I said, one day I'll buy a color printer, or maybe not. This is the inside of it, and it's an absolutely magnificent theater. But it is kind of glows because of there are so many lights. So this is where she goes. She was surprised to see so many men in the audience and wondered how they could leave their business in the afternoon. Well, that's what she knows from home. She doesn't realize that there's a whole leisure class. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Her excitement impaired her power of listening. She's so overwhelmed by this. What they're playing, the symphony is playing, is Dvorak's Symphony in E minor, called in the program From the New World. And it isn't until the middle of the next paragraph we've another moment of awakening. There's going to be many small ones. Here were the sand hills, the grasshoppers and locusts, all the things that wakened and chirped in the early morning. This is what she's seeing in the music. The reaching of high plains, the immeasurable yearning of flatlands. There was home in it, too. First memories, first mornings long ago, the amazement of a new soul in a new world. This is Taya. A soul new and yet old, that had dreamed something despairing, something glorious in the dark before it was born. A soul obsessed by what it did not know under the cloud of a past it did not recall. So it's like she's emerging at the bottom of this page. She was startled when the orchestra began to play again, the entry of the gods into Valhalla. I have a note on that. Okay. This is just more about the music. The stories drawn from the Scandinavian and Germanic legend weave together myths of the gods with human heroic tragedy and portray a struggle between greed, represented by the magic ring, and human love, a battle that ends in the destruction of the world. The cycle was first produced in its entirety at a German festival Wagner designed for productions of his own work in 1876. So she's experiencing Wagner. At the top of the next page, end paragraph. So it happened that with a dull, almost listless ear, she heard for the first time that troubled music, ever darkening, ever brightening, which was to flow through so many years of her life. It's like an ebb and flow. An ebb and flow. The next paragraph, the streets were full of cold, hurrying, angry people running for streetcars and barking at you. That's exactly what it's like downtown. Exactly. Especially when it's snowing and people are cold. For almost the first time, Taya was conscious of the city itself, of the congestion of life all about her, of the brutality and power of those streams that flowed in the streets, threatening to drive one under. People jostled her, ran into her, poked her aside with their elbows, uttering angry exclamations. So she's never really experienced the crowd or never really even saw it. And it's that is the way Chicago crowds are. They aren't like the crowds that we see in downtown Cedarburg. It was kind of a surprise for me to move here, and everybody looked me in the eye and said hello. I couldn't believe it. Oh, and they like my dogs too. Whereas if you're in downtown Chicago, nah, people don't even look you in the eye. And next paragraph, page 186. When her cape blew up, perhaps, why did these men torment her? A cloud of dust blew in her face and blinded her. There was some power abroad in the world bent upon taking away from her that feeling with which she had come out of the concert hall. Everything seemed to sweep down on her or to tear it out of her under her cape. So she wants to keep in herself the music, and she's looks to me like she's being eyed up by this or that man, but she doesn't want to let go of the music. A few lines later, they had to be met. They were lined up against her. They were there to take something from her. Very well, they should never have it. They might trample her to death, but they should never have it. As long as she lived, that ecstasy was going to be hers. She would live it, work for it, die for it, but she was going to have it time after time, height after height. The nugget, the awakening is getting bigger and bigger. She would have it. What the trumpets were singing, she would have it. Have it. Under the cape, she pressed her hands upon her heaving bosom. That was a little girl's no longer. She has awakened. On the top of the next page is a reference to Theodore Thomas. Theodore Thomas was a real conductor. He was a German-born violinist and conductor, 1835 to 1905, and director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra between 1891 and 1905. Thomas was one of the most influential advocates of Wagner's music in the United States. So, let's see. On one afternoon in April, the conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra had turned out his desk lighting and was about to leave his office in the auditorium building when Harsanyi appeared in the doorway. They apparently know each other, and Harsanyi has recognized in Taya the magical voice and has to give her up. He needs to give her up for her sake, and recommends her to Theodore Thomas. And Theodore Thomas, he asks, who is the best voice teacher? Madison Bowers, he said. Boy, are we going to get an eyeful of Madison Bowers. Down at the bottom, I think it will be, though her low voice has a beautiful quality, very individual. She's had no instruction in voice at all, and I shrink from handing her over to anybody. Her own instinct about it has been so good. It was one of those voices that manages itself easily without thinking as it goes up. Good breathing and perfect relaxation. But she must have a teacher, of course. There is a break in the middle voice so that the voice does not all work together in unevenness. And so he says, he's just describing her, but the interesting thing about this is that we are now getting Harsanyi's point of view of her in his description to Theodore Thomas. She has no cultivation whatever. She came to me like a fine young savage, a book with nothing written in it. She has a quality very individual. And then Harsanyi admits, I cannot teach her to sing. At the top of the next page, he says, my wife says that with that girl one swallow does not make a summer. So I looked that up. And what that means, maybe you've heard that before. I've never heard that before. That means that although something is good, it may not remain so. So with this girl, Harsanyi has seen that she needs the voice teacher. Otherwise, it may not remain good, according to his wife, which is probably true. Voices are so often disappointing. And then in the next paragraph, all the intelligence and talent in the world can't make a singer. The voice is a wild thing. It can't be bred in captivity. It is a sport like the silver fox. It happens. So it's intangible. And if you go over to page 190, there's a reference to the great chorus of the Festival Association. The Festival Association, Theodore Thomas led Cincinnati's biannual musical festivals from 1873 to 1904. The great chorus from 1873 season included over 1,000 voices singing Haydn, Mozart, Handel, Wagner, Mendelssohn, and Gluck. That's 1,000 voices singing that. That's amazing. The next couple of paragraphs is a rundown of Thomas's story. Thomas, when he was a teenager, as you know, kind of wandered around, played the violin. And the last paragraph of this page, as he said, it was not a voice and execution alone. There was a greatness about them. These are Jenny Lind and Henrietta Sontag. Those are also real people. Henrietta Sontag, German operatic soprano whose popularity rivaled that of Jenny Lind. Theodore Thomas was first violinist in the orchestra that accompanied both Lind and Sontag on their tours. So in Thomas, these two women awaken him. They were great women, great artists. They opened a new world to him. To me, he says. From that time, his ideas about strings was completely changed, and on his violin he tried always for the singing, vibrating tone instead of the loud, somewhat harsh tone that is prevalent among even the best violinists. I think that's the difference between country Irish violining and the vibrato in a symphony It's much smoother. Not that I play the violin, but I think that's the difference. If we look at the top of page 191. But of course, the great thing I got from Lind and Sontag was the indefinite, not the definite thing. For an impressionable boy, their inspiration was incalculable. They gave me my first feeling for the Italian style, but I could never say how much they gave me. At that age, such influences were actually creative. I always think of my artistic consciousness as beginning with them. And so Thomas knows the awakening that might be occurring in Taya. This next chapter is all about the definition of art. What is art? So Thomas sends her to this fella named Madison Bowers. Try not to sneeze. He is the best vocal teacher in Chicago. I looked him up. He's fictional. And if we go to the next page, let's see. Okay, Harsanyi breaks it to Taya that he's going to let her essentially be free. I believe that your voice is worth all that you can put into it. I have not come to this decision rashly. I have studied you, and I have become more and more convinced against my own desires. So there's a selflessness in it. At the bottom of page 192, nothing can ever take the place of that first training. You know very well that your technique is good, but it is not remarkable. That he's talking about her piano talent. It will never overtake your intelligence. You have a fine power of work, but you are not by nature a student. You are not by nature, I think, a pianist. Let's see, at the top of 193, at the end of the first paragraph, I believe that the strongest need of your nature is to find yourself, to emerge as yourself. Until I heard you sing, I wondered how you were to do this, but it has grown clearer to me every day. So, is that what art is? The definition of self? Next paragraph. If you knew how fortunate I sometimes think you. With the voice, the way is so much shorter. The rewards are more easily won. In your voice, I think nature herself did for you what it would take you many years to do at the piano. And she says, yes, I suppose so. When did you first feel that you wanted to be an artist? I don't know. There was always something, she says. That's it. That's the something she always felt. Always, until I came to you. It was you who made me want to play piano. Before, I tried to think I did, but I was pretending. He asks her if she had ever thought about singing. And over on the next page at the top, 194. Can't you see, my dear girl? That was only because I happened to be the first artist you have ever known. Next few lines. Something has been struggling against me. See, here we were, you and I and this instrument. He tapped the piano. 3 good friends. Working so hard. I like that image. But all the while there was something fighting us, your gift and the woman you were meant to be. When you find your way to that gift and to that woman, you will be at peace. In the beginning, it was an artist that you wanted to be. Well, you may be an artist always. So he saw that in her in the same way Wunsch saw it, and the same way Ray saw it in her eye. At the top of page 195, she says, I come of rough people. I'm rough, but I'm independent too. It was all I had. There's no use my talking, Mr. Harsanyi. I can't tell you. So she can't articulate what is in her that is artistic. You needn't tell me. I know. Every artist knows. End of the next paragraph. One can fail oneself, but one must not live to see that fail. Better never reveal it. Let me help you to make yourself sure of it. That I can do better than Bowers. Next paragraph. What you never show to anyone will need companionship. And then you must come to me. He peered into her face with that searching, intimate glance. You know what I mean. The thing in you that has no business with what is little, that will have to do only with beauty and power. There's another form of definition of artist, beauty and power. So I'm turning you over to Bowers at the bottom of page 196. He's sad and kind of angry that he has to do this. But someday I shall be able to look in her face and laugh because I did what I could for her. I believe in her. She will do nothing common. She is uncommon in a common world. That is what I get out of it. It means more to me than if she played at my concert and brought me a dozen pupils. All this drudgery would kill me if once in a while I cannot hope something for somebody. If I cannot sometimes to see a bird fly and wave my hand to it. What a beautiful image, but it again is kind of embedded in the Song of the Lark. His tone was angry and injured. Mrs. Harsanyi understood that this was one of the times when his wife was a part of the drudgery and the common world. He had let something he cared for go, and he felt bitterly about whatever was left. So he's going to get left behind. Maybe. We'll see how that goes. If we look on page 197, she's heading back to Moonstone for the summer break, which begins in the train. The lights in the day coach were turned low and the ventilators were open, admitting showers of soot and dust upon the occupants of the narrow green plush chairs, which were tilted at various angles of discomfort. Doesn't that sound like airplane seats? They haven't gotten any better. Because you know how you can sit, you have to sit perfectly up straight. Because if you put your seat back, then the guy behind you has no leg room, and then they bang on your chair if they're rude. In each of these chairs, some uncomfortable human being lay drawn up or stretched out or writhing from one position to another. I think that's just so funny that is the kind of chairs they had at the time. The details are hilarious. So she's going back to Moonstone for her summer vacation. She's sitting in the day coach. At the top of page 198, at her age, discomfort was a small matter when one made $5 a day by it. So she was able to save $5 by sitting in the day coach, with which she's going to purchase lunch in the food coach. And then there's this poor raggedy girl who's got a horrible cough, sitting in a robe over her clothes, presumably to keep them clean. But the description of the cough, of course, is pretty relevant since we fret about COVID so much. Down at the bottom of page 198, with her other teachers, she had felt a personal relation. But with him, Bowers, she did not. Bowers was a big, cold, bitter, avaricious man, but he knew a great deal about voices. At the top of page 199, this is an image I'm going to have to remember. Harsanyi declared that he had a soul of a shrimp and could no more make an artist than a throat specialist could. Next paragraph. She's happier since she had been studying with him than she had been before. She had always told herself that she studied piano to fit herself in to be a music teacher. That's where she was headed, which is why Cather had to get rid of Ray so she could get away from that future. But she never asked herself why she was studying voice. Her voice, more than any other part of her, had to do with that confidence, that sense of wholeness and inner well-being that she had felt at moments ever since she could remember. There's another piece of the definition of art. Next paragraph. There had always been something. Hitherto, she had felt but one obligation toward it, secrecy, to protect it even from herself. She had always believed that by doing all that was required of her by her family, her teachers, her pupils, she kept that part of herself from being caught up in the meshes of common things. She fears, therefore, that if she let it out, that it would be crushed. and it would be redirected. Like what she almost saw at the Christmas concert when the girl Lily, who didn't have any real voice, took the better part. She took it for granted. She took it for granted that someday, when she was older, she would know a great deal more about it. It was as if she had an appointment to meet the rest of herself sometime, somewhere. That it was moving to meet her, and she was moving to meet it. So that's another definition of art. Clearly, it's difficult to define art. If we were to open a dictionary, we would get the dictionary definition, but that is not the commitment, the interior. At the bottom of this page, why had he cared so much? She's talking about Ray and Wunsch and Dr. Archie and Spanish Johnny. Why had they? It was something that had to do with her that made them care. But it was not she. It was something they believed in, but it was not she. And it's this process of meeting herself. They recognize it because they too have it. They too are artistic. They have art. At the top of 200, why was it that they seemed to feel and to hunt for a second person in her and not in each other? Yeah, that's a good question. What if one's second self could somehow speak to all these second selves? What if one could bring them out, as whiskey did Spanish Johnny's? How did they lay these second persons? How little one knew about them except to guard them fiercely. It was to music more than anything else that these hidden things in people responded. Spanish Johnny, right? Let's see, at the bottom of page 200. She was going to have a few things before she died. She realized that there were a great many trains dashing east and west on the face of the continent that night, and that they all carried young people who meant to have things. But the difference was that she was going to get them. That was all. Let people try to stop her. She glowered at the rows of feckless bodies that lay sprawled in the chairs. Let them try once. Along with the yearning came from some deep part of her that was selfless and exalted. Thea had a hard kind of cockiness, a determination to get ahead. Well, there were passages in life when that fierce, stubborn self-assertion will stand its ground after the nobler feeling is overwhelmed and beaten under. So, in other words, she will have disappointments on the way towards meeting this other self. Let's see, over on page 202, Thea felt that she was coming back to her own land. She had often heard Mrs. Kronberg say that she believed in immigration, and so did Thea believe in it. The earth seemed to her young and fresh and kindly, a place where refugees from old, sad countries were given another chance. The mere absence of rocks gave the soil a kind of amiability and generosity. The absence of natural boundaries gave the spirit a wider nature. Wire fences might mark the end of a man's pasture, but they could not shut in his thoughts as mountains and forests can. It was over flat lands like this, stretching out to drink the sun, that the lark sang, and one's heart sang there too. And I very much imagine that Cather saw in the landscape this kind of exaltation. It is intangible, but powerful. She had the sense of going back to a friendly soil, whose friendship was somehow going to strengthen her. A naive, generous country that gave one its joyous force, its large-hearted, childlike power to love, just as it gave one its coarse, brilliant flowers, like the prickly pears. As she drew into that glorious air, Thea's mind went back to Ray Kennedy. He, too, had that feeling of empire. Next few lines. That feeling, she reflected, was the real element of companionship between her and Ray. And that's what they shared. It's this admiration of the secret self, the artist emerging. So she returns to Moonstone. I'm going to keep going. What the heck? We're a little bit behind. She returns to Moonstone and returns to the fold of her family. And remember, they have been described as essentially chaos. She suddenly realized that Anna had always disliked her. That's her sister, the one that was second in command. But so she zips on over to Mrs. Kohler's on a radiant summer morning, where she would see the pigeons and their pink feet. We'll never look at pigeons the same way again, because I knew they had pink feet, but I sure didn't see them. Anyway, over on page 206, Mrs. Kronberg asked her about Bowers and Harsanyi. She felt a great change in Thea, in her face and in her manner. And then a few lines later, her body had the elasticity that comes of being highly charged with the desire to live. And then in the middle of the next paragraph, she would make a very handsome woman, Mrs. Kronberg said to herself, if she would only get rid of that fierce look she has sometimes. Next chapter, chapter 10, she is gradually visiting her friends, and one of them, of course, is Spanish Johnny. On page 209, she talks to him and sings a song that they used to sing together, and he invites her to the Mexican ball. The Mexicans are painted in a very sympathetic light. Ray Kennedy used to know all about their little doings, but since his death, there was no one whom the Mexicans consider simpatico. There seems to be quite the divide between the other immigrants and the Mexicans. She attends this Mexican ball, and with her, she sits with Mrs. Telemantes, and if you look at the top of page 211, Thea soon decided that the poor dancer was herself. And she describes the Mexicans in contrast, really, to the people that Thea comes from. This Mexican dance was soft and quiet. There was no calling. The conversation was very low. The rhythm of the music was smooth and engaging. The men were graceful and courteous. A few lines later, there was an atmosphere of ease and friendly pleasure. This is a direct contrast to what Thea will experience in her own family home once everybody finds out she's been at this Mexican ball. There was no constraint of any kind there tonight, but a kind of natural harmony about their movements, their greetings, their low conversations, and their smiles. And it's all about their music. Many of them don't know what to make of her because, as I said, there was such a contrast between their black hair and her white and gold hair, like Easter, one of the young men says. Next, I'm on page 212. In the middle of the page, these young men are kind of keeping their eye on her, but Heather tells us that was not difficult. One blonde head, moving among so many dark ones. Let's see. At the bottom of page 213, here's another little crumb that is going into, it's an ingredient that goes into the making of Thea. The future artist. She had sung for churches and funerals and teachers, but she had never before sung for a really musical people. And this was the first time she had ever felt the response that such a people can give. They turned themselves and all they had over to her. So it's like they comprehend her art. Mrs. Telemantes' fateful resignation, Johnny's madness, the adoration of the boy who lay still in the sand. In an instant, these things seemed to be within her instead of without, as if they had come from her in the first place. And so she's finding that she and her audience have merged through the music. There's a folk song down at the bottom that they sing. Johnny laughed and hugged his guitar. You not forget him. So it's a song that they used to sing. Over on page 215, Taya remembered the old stories about his spells. She had never seen him when his madness was on him, but she felt something tonight at her elbow that gave her an idea of what it might be like. For the first time, she fully understood the cryptic explanation that Mrs. Telemantes made to Dr. Archie long ago. So all along, all through the book, Johnny has been described as having two different selves, and that is another example of someone who possesses this other self. And remember the explanation? It was Mrs. Telemantes saying that when Johnny heard the sea in the shell, to him it was the sea. But the logic of it is what appeals to everybody else who hears it. But for him, it is the sea. Okay, there's a reference to an opera by Verdi. Sure, we can sing Trovatore. We have no alto, but all the girls can sing alto and make some noise. Over on the top of page 216, across the gulch, the little house of the Kohlers slept among the trees, a dark spot on the white face of the desert. So the Kohlers' house, now remember the Kohlers possess some musicality and artistry as well. So she's Taya's out at the Mexican ball, out in more space, and this is place. The last paragraph of this, there's a reference to Lucia, an opera by Donizetti based on a Walter Novel movie. And what was my point here? So the Kohlers hear the Mexican ball, and over the top of it, they can hear Taya singing. And they say, listen, Horch. I probably didn't say that properly, but how it played in and about and around and over them like goldfish darting among the creek minnows. Isn't that fabulous? Like a yellow butterfly soaring above a swarm of dark ones. Ah, said Mrs. Kohler softly, the dear man, if he could hear her now. They're talking about lunch, but they understood. The Kohlers recognized the I, the it, in Taya. So I think we will stop here. I did a good bit to get us nearly caught up, but I've been going for an hour and 45 minutes, and I think there's a point at which you can't listen anymore. There's a point at which I can't talk anymore. So we will resume here with a picture of Taya within her family home. We'll see how that goes. And we will reconvene next week. Have a good week. Stay well. And guess what? The sun has come out. Yay. Have a good week.